and really go into it. I had an interesting conversation with a buddy of mine the other day, and I wanted to ask you this question because I thought it was an interesting conversation, but I wanted to give you a heads up before I asked
We
it.
get into it? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So my buddy had approached me. He has a 7-year-old son, and he went to a baseball tryout over the weekend. Now, this tryout was like a lot of parents there, a lot of kids. And so the kid was very overwhelmed. It's almost like it seemed like he had a panic attack where his body started like taking over. He was trembling, started crying. And so my buddy like called me for kind of like some advice. So I was just listening to him and kind of just understanding like, hey, did your son play baseball before? And they said, yes, he did, but not like tryouts. It seemed like it was like up the next level because they wanted at the tryout, they didn't want to make like a super team. So they wanted to divvy up the talent. So that's why they had like tryouts. So he played soccer before, but he's always been with like a friend. So this time he had that friend there. So he didn't have like that comfort.
Sure.
So when he was telling me about it, I'm like, man, it seems like your son was kind of having a panic attack where like he was having some sort of like thought going on in his head and he was kind of like catastrophizing thought and he kind of was like losing control. And so I wanted to talk to you about that because he was asking me like, what tools could I use, to kind of better handle the situation? Because I was like, well, how are you handling it? Like, were you calm? Because he's your safety blanket, And so he goes, I thought I was doing pretty good, but I probably could have handled it better. And he basically didn't know how to calm his son down. And one of our friends who actually came on the podcast, he was a strength and conditioning coach at St. John's Prep in Boston. And a mental health exercise that they do with their athletes is called Be Where Your Feet Are, where basically if you're having some sort of anxiety or sense of overwhelm, depression or something, you start to focus on, okay, what do you feel with your feet?
Yeah.
What do you feel with your hands? What do you hear? Just to stop those thoughts.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was like, again, he's 7, so it's like, it's you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's the biggest challenge is like he's 7 years old. How much is he going to actually retain and take away from it? I mean, I've heard of the be where your feet are aspect, right? It's all about grounding, right? It's all about like putting yourself in the present and not allowing the moment to become too big, right? And so like I talk to a group of college hockey players every Monday or one Monday a month. I don't know why that's so hard to say, but anyway, we talked about in this last one about tryouts and about like going to a new team and when juniors in hockey, it's a huge thing of like, you show up and like they already kind of have most of their squad. And sometimes it's the same way in baseball, right? Like you show up at moments and they're just like, yeah, we identified like, let's say 8 or 9 of these guys. We're looking to fill in maybe 3 or 4 at 7. Usually it's like one of the town things and they're trying out and they're like basically deciding who's going to be who. But as a 7-year-old kid, like it's about having fun. And that's one of my biggest things as a sports psych consultant is to allow people to understand that like when you're coaching youth, you have such an impact that you don't even recognize you have. Like we just give so much power to these parents. We're like, hey, go do your thing. And then it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then we get mad at them when they yell at people. It's like, dude, you coach, you parent the same way that you were parented or coached, regardless of what happens, unless you purposefully want to change, you know?
Yeah.
So I go ahead.
And I was gonna say, what's fascinating about this, because John and I were talking about this yesterday, how like back when we were playing, it seemed like there was a focus on fun, but now it's almost like it seems like it's very intense at an early age.
It is. Well, everyone, unfortunately, the culture shift that we've experienced when we were playing, it 100% was about fun, right? Depending on the coach you had, right? Like if you had like the Mr. Hennigans back in Windsor Locks, like sometimes things were a little aggressive and difficult, right? But like there's an aspect of like it was just to go to have fun, right? You were learning skills, you're developing new skills, and you're also making friendships, right? I mean, and that's one of the biggest things that sports really provides us is a social network. We call all these things like transferable skills, like the things that we learn through sport that we can apply in other realms. But yeah, like at a youth age, it's all about having fun, but like it's transitioned into parents either they didn't live up to their own expectations, so now they're hoping that their kid does, or they're hoping that their kid is the next Aaron Judge or something. It's like,
Yeah.
bro, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. Like you just have to give them the stats of like, I mean, you can try, but like it's so rare to have that happen. And of course, there's always those parents like, well, my kid is, and it's like, I bet. Talk to me in like 20 years, like, and if it is, I will eat crow right in front of you. I'll be like, hey, kudos to you. But the chances are that you're the one eating crow. So it's just an interesting dynamic. But yeah, the culture has shifted. It's all about like pay to play now. It's all who has the most money, and that's unfortunately when you think about dynamics and culture, it's also hurting the aspects of real raw talent being exposed. Because if the parents can't afford it or the family can't afford it for whatever situation, some of the best players in the world aren't being selected or seen because of that. So it just creates a whole interesting dichotomy, really.
Yeah. So, as a sports psych consultant here, like, tell us a little bit about your business then. Kind of where it kind of stemmed from, where it started from, and kind of where you are today with it.
Yeah, sure, man. So it started off as a professional counselor business, right? So like I got my LPC here in Connecticut back in 2018, and I kind of just started a business as a side gig to make a little extra cash because working for a nonprofit, I wasn't making enough money to pay the almighty student loan. So what I did is I started this and I kind of just launched it. And then what happened is like I had gone to school in athletic counseling to like work with athletes specifically. And so I started slowly getting into the sports psych realm. I took an extra class that I had to take and all this kind of stuff. I did all the hours that you have to do, the supervision, and paid all the money and played the game, right, that you have to play to sometimes get where you want to be. So I did that. And then the sports psych thing really launched probably like 2-3 years ago. COVID helped a little bit, but also it hurt it at the same time. It's a very interesting time. I don't even know if any of us truly remember what that time was like. I was in the city the other weekend and I was like, whoa, there's no masks on. I was like, I remember being here 3 years ago and I never thought that I'd see a person's face in public again. So
I know
it's a weird world we live in.
It's weird, man.
Yeah. But the practice kind of just started elevating, right? And so like I hired some people who were also LPCs and CMPCs. So we find a way to like kind of meet the mental health needs of people and then work with athletes on the outside. So I take care of the art of the sports psych stuff. I work with Olympic athletes. I work with pro athletes. I work with a lot of collegiate athletes and teams doing like team workshops and things like that on like skill development, leadership, communication, mental skills. I mean, we can go down the whole gambit of it as we have time. But the practice is kind of ever growing and it's also malleable at all times. Like I'm always able to shape it. And it's just a fun job. Like my job is truly, I don't know what I'm going to get every day. Sure. Some days feel like Groundhog Day, especially when everything is kind of telehealth and I'm just sitting in front of a screen, but the conversations are always different and unique. So that makes the job kind of fun.
That is pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So if you could kind of like articulate the role of like a sports psychology consultant, how would you kind of describe that role?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot, and it's not always the easiest to answer. But the best way to kind of explain it is we help develop skills, and we help athletes or teams or coaches to basically take things that they already have inside of them and use them in a functional and productive manner. To perform at their best mentally, right? So like that idea of like when you're dealing with anxiety, which we all get, it's a natural thing. If you're not anxious, you hear the old phrase of like, it means you don't care, which to some respect is very true, right? If you have no care about something, you're not going to really get anxious about it. Anxious usually means that you care about either the performance, the result, the outcome, whatever it is. So it's one of those things where like we help people harness that and then develop mental skills or mental reactions or just be mentally prepared. It's just like you practice physical, right? You have to practice the mental. It's one thing I always say to people is like, well, how many days a week do you practice and how many hours like at physical practice? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like 10, 15. It's like, all right, how many times do you practice your mental game? Usually maybe an hour if we're lucky, right? So it's one of those things where like it should be practiced almost the same amount of time because otherwise when you try to use it in the moment that you need it, chances are you don't have the skill developed properly, or you're just like, oh, they said breathe, and you're like, and you're hyperventilating, and you're like, it's not working, and I don't know why breath isn't working. It's like, well, because that's not how you breathe. But cheers. So So yeah, I would say in short, as I continue to ramble, usually, it's just helping people perform at their best when they need to perform at their best.
Gotcha. So you mentioned anxiety, right? Is that something that you're seeing a lot of athletes struggle with? Like, what's the primary thing when it comes to the mentals and it comes to the mental aspect of performance, especially in athletes now? Is that the most common challenge you're seeing? Or if not, kind of is that too general of a term to use maybe?
I don't think it's too general. I think anxiety is a thing that we all kind of experience just as human beings.
Yeah.
Like anxiety is just kind of like a day-to-day thing also, but then it's sport specific at times, right? So like we talk about like trait and state anxiety, right? So trait anxiety is kind of how we are as a person. Like certain things make me nervous. If I'm around clowns, I'm freaking out. Right. So it's like that's just part of my personality and that's where I'm at. But then the state anxiety, right, is the idea of like think of it as like a state of being or a statement, like it's a moment in time. So like you think about like your pressure free throws or your penalty kicks or your penalty shootout or things like that. So like when does that anxiety actually kick in? What kind of anxiety is it? And we kind of deal with it specifically to that moment that they're going through. But to answer the question of like what do I see the most? Anxiety is always there, and I think it's something that like I see with every athlete, but it's not always like the pressing thing. A lot of the time I see a lot of self-talk, right? And it's usually negative self-talk, like that little voice in their head that kind of is like telling them that they can't do something or that they stink, or that they're not going to make this shot or that they can't do this or that they're not good enough. I mean, we can go down the realm of negative words that we want to use with ourselves, but a lot of negative self-talk, and for me it's just a lot of there's lack of preparation. Like they just don't know how to prepare, right? And so that's the thing. So I would say self-talk, anxiety, and just a lack of prep. Like they get into this hoping that they can find something, and then realize like, oh, I haven't really practiced this or any of this at all. So that can be really difficult.
Yeah.
And with that negative self-talk, do you find that impacts their confidence? Because I'm just picturing Mac Jones, okay, the guy had the first year.
Poor
He went
guy.
to a Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
I remember Brooks Quebec. Oh, what's his name? The golfer. Brooks
Koepka?
Yeah.
Brooks Koepka.
Brooks
Yeah.
Koepka.
You mean Brooke Koepka? Yeah.
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 He I'm watching Full Swing. First season, dude was destroyed. No confidence. This year in Full Swing, boom, comes out, wins a major. So is there, I mean, clearly when you lose self-confidence, your performance just dips. Do you find that self-talk and self-confidence go hand in hand?
They definitely can, right? And so I think the hardest part is also to help people recognize that confidence is a state of time or state of being, right? And a good example of this is recognizing like we can be really confident, right? Let's take a podcast, for example, right? I can come in here knowing what I want to talk about, and I feel confident about what I'm going to talk about, and I feel good about what I'm about to say. And then maybe I get asked a question that I am like, oh, crap, right? My confidence is all of a sudden gone, and I don't even know what that feeling was like, right? So like confidence is a very fluctuating experience. So it's more about the idea of becoming solid and understanding what your state of confidence usually is. Going in feeling like you can accomplish something is a pretty good place to be confidence-wise. But when you start allowing that self-talk to kind of creep in, sure, it's definitely going to affect how you feel about your future actions, your next move, the way that you're kind of going through. Golf is a beautiful example. So yeah, Brooks Koepka is one of those guys that he is a basket case, and I feel comfortable saying that. He goes from 1 minute saying I don't want to play in the PGA Tour to the next coming out and being able to do things that again are incredible, like winning a major. So it's like one of those aspects of what did he do? Did he find a new baseline for his confidence, right? And how does he get himself back into that baseline when he either becomes overconfident, because staying humble is valuable too, or when he loses it, how does he get himself back to it? So I think it's about finding that baseline of confidence and addressing it that way.
And then just to kind of like piggyback on that if we kind of go in the other direction where you have maybe young kids or young athletes where they're struggling to develop confidence, right? In a sport or maybe even life. Are there some, and for John and I, we've always said to build self-confidence, you got to take action. Now that's normally with adults, it's easier to kind of articulate that and for them to understand it. With kids, you know, how do you kind of tell them to break it down in simple terms to say, hey, this is kind of how you develop confidence, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's important to share with them. Kids are sponges, man. We could, I mean, that's, it's always a funny thing to think about. Like, the only reason we know that there's a podcast or that I'm talking into a microphone or I'm wearing headphones is because someone told me and then I believe them, right? I mean, the idea is that you could like tell your kid, this is spaghetti, and they talk into spaghetti all the time. And it's like, wow, that's impressive. So to go off of that, it's the idea of reminding them that confidence is built and created by successful repetitions of doing a skill or doing an activity, right? So it's like, hey, when you make a mistake, it's okay. What went well there, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, like I followed through properly, but I didn't release the ball at the right time. Okay, great. Like let's focus now just on the release, and the follow through will come. So it's like it's breaking it down, and self demonstration and demonstration itself is super important, right? Like, so as coaches and as parents, when you're like teaching your kid how to throw a baseball for the first time or throw a football, it's about like demonstrating the motions and breaking them down into very specific times so that the kid, not that they're overthinking it, but that they can like see it and then also practice every certain step, right? I mean, and you hear about it in whether it's an MLB pitcher or an NFL quarterback, like, oh, the release was here, or his leg kick was up too high. Like they break down all the minute things, and those just means that they focus on other things more times than not. So confidence is just built by successful repetitions of doing something, and then demonstrating the proper technique and allowing the kid to have the autonomy to choose what works for them and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I think at that young of an age too, I think when they're learning how people around them are reacting to them not doing something properly is going to train them on how to behave as an athlete or whatever moving into their, teenage and adult years. So I would think a lot of times too, where you have these players or kids, adults, whoever, right? You have these players who are nervous in a moment, who are anxious in a moment. Are they anxious in the moment because they're not confident in their skills or abilities, or are they anxious in that moment because they're afraid to fail in front of people and what they're going to think of them and how they'll be perceived after said failure? So I think that's where we have a little bit of where, like you said, kids are sponges. They're not just sponges to the technique and the skills that they're being taught. They're sponges to their environment and what they're being shown by the adults around them, what happens when they don't succeed. So that's where they're making that connection, I think, the most. And that's what's going to lead to maybe some of those, as they call them, the yips in sports, right? Like that's why they're going to be present there. Do you feel like that's accurate?
Yeah, you use the Y word, which gives me the cringies. But anyway, I'm just kidding. But yeah, if you say the yips word in any locker room or dugout, you're going to get punched in the face.
Yeah,
as you know. But it's one of those. 100% it's accurate, right? And so this is where, like, when I talk with coaches or I talk with youth athletes and the parents, right? Sometimes I give demonstrations to local basketball organizations and things. It's like the reaction and the debrief that you give, right? Like your kid is always watching you, right? Like I once worked with a pro soccer player, and he had anger issues. And the reason he had anger issues is because his dad used to berate him as a kid, like sometimes right on the field. And he said, every time I made a mistake, I'd look over to my dad, right? And so that was something for him that he really struggled with. And so like that's difficult to deal with, and then kind of process through. So I share the example, and hopefully it's something that the parents listening and the coaches listening kind of take from. As athletes, we know when we mess up, right? We know when we've made a mistake. No one has to usually tell us. At a very young age, sure. Like, hey, you shouldn't have gone there. You should go here, kind of thing. But like usually we know when we've made a play that was not the right play. That's kind of how athletes operate. So instead of berating them in the car on the ride home, ask two questions. And this comes from one of my buddies who played for the Arsenal second squad over in England. And he talked to me about what his dad used to say to him after every training session, after every game. It was, how do you think you played? And do you want to go work on it? Those were the only two questions his dad ever asked him, right? And whether he felt like he played well and wanted to go work on it, or he felt like he played bad and didn't want to go work on it, his dad just did what the kid wanted, right? Yeah. It also helps you understand where your kid is, right? If your kid doesn't want to go play sports, or isn't like so invested in this sport that you think he should be, he's going to tell you, right? But you have to listen and be okay with the idea that like your kid's a human being and a person, and they have the autonomy to do that. And that's the one where I usually get the looks from parents of like, well, that's my child. And it's like, I get it, but also like you want your kid to have the autonomy to make decisions for themselves, right? So, so I think asking those two questions: how do you think you played? Do you want to go work on it? It's just super valuable because the kid then will be more likely to be like, yeah, I had a really bad game. Like, can we go work on my like fastball placement, or can we go work on like hitting a receiver in stride, or can we go work on my through balls? Whatever the sport is, like the kid will want to work on it if they want to work on it, but give them the choice to. Don't make it a demand and a chore. No one wants to do what you tell them. Right. Ever.
Yeah.
That stems all the way up until your work. Right.
Exactly.
When your boss says, do this, you're like, I don't want to. They're like, I don't care. Right. But if you tell someone why they're doing something, they get buy-in, they kind of produce better. So if you tell your kid, well, hey, like maybe we could go work on that. And the importance is like, confidence is built by successful repetition. So the more that we practice this, the better you're going to get at, and the more confident you're going to feel. And then we loop everything all into one. And then it's a nice little cupcake and the kid feels better. So,
yeah, I love those two questions. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so with the athletes that you've worked with, it's very common now to play like one sport all year round. Yeah. Are you seeing now a lot of athletes that are getting burnt out because they just play one sport, and it's from an early age all the way to like, you're seeing it maybe in college, maybe even in the Olympics, they're starting to just get burnt out. Are you seeing that? And like, are you able to kind of like coach them through it, or they're kind of just releasing that to you? But like, I'm just so done with this sport.
Yeah, it's more common than we think, and it's honestly upsetting because the kid still has love for the game, but they might not love the competition level, or they might not be ready to, like, they might just love the game, right? And they might not want to take it to the next level. And that's the thing, is like, just because someone's good at something doesn't always mean that they want to do it for a living, or that they want to go into the next realm of the pressures of college or high-end junior prep or the pros, whatever it is, right? And so I work in a human performance lab down at Southern Connecticut State. Like, I do the mental performance stuff, and I work with exercise physiologists, some of the greatest guys I've ever met in my life. They're so way too smart for me. They say things, and I'm like, sure, yeah, whatever you sounds great, bro. But they're so intelligent, and what we talk about all the time, because it kind of stems into this burnout, is there's research coming out all the time that shows being one sport dominant is actually really bad for muscle growth. Right. There's a reason that there's more ACL tears. There's a reason that there's more muscle injuries and certain things like that. And you guys would know that more than anybody. Right. And so there's that aspect of when you play multiple sports, you're developing a more well-rounded muscle group. And so like it goes farther than the mental stuff. It goes into like the true physical stuff. I think about us growing up. That wasn't really a thing. Right. Like you played something in the fall, you played something in the winter, you did something in the spring, and then the summer you just did whatever the hell you wanted and had some fun with it. Right. And honestly, like, I feel pretty good. Right. I mean, I'm 31, still running triathlons and running half marathons. And I'm like, sure, do I get the back pain randomly when I get out of bed? Sure. That's just called age. Right. Yeah. But my point is like, I've never, knock on wood, ever broken any bones or really had any severe like muscle issues, right? Besides this, like a strained hamstring here and there, but that's just life. So like, it's one of those things of like, it's happening more and more, the ACL tears, the MCL tears, all those kind of ligament injuries, because there's not enough like quad and hamstring built up to like really protect it, as again, you guys are the experts in that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
I think with younger kids now too, like we said, and everything else, they're kind of forced to grow up so fast, that they're being, but they're being guided in the same sense. So it's like you're a soccer star. That's what you are. You know what I mean? They're like taught that, like, because the parent wants that, right?
Correct.
But but you look at guys like CJ Stroud, right? Like, look how he warms up for games. He's playing on the sidelines. He's playing basketball. He's playing baseball. He plays every sport as a warm up for his body to get ready to go play football.
Right.
And like, you're seeing different athletes now utilize all these different training styles, like you said, for different sports, because it's good for the body. Exactly. So I think the more parents can understand that stuff as their role as a parent to exploit their kids to all those things and say, this is all great for you, instead of just, you're a soccer star or you're a baseball star, you're Aaron Judge 2.0. Like we talked before, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not
Yeah.
a thing. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's just, I feel like a lot of these things will go back to, it's not really even about the kids. It's, you know what I mean? That, as crazy as that sounds, do you maybe feel like that could be a case when you're talking to the kids, you're almost sending subliminal messages over to the parents?
I usually, when I work, so I tend to work with college and pro players, right?
Yep.
And the reason is I can have more difficult conversations with them, and I can curse and
That's fair.
just kind of stay true to me, right? But I do work a lot with the youth, parents, and teams as an organization, right?
Okay.
And so when I do that, the conference, you can tell the kids who are in it, and you can tell the kids who aren't. And sometimes you can tell the parents who are way too into it, and you're just like, dude, you got to breathe. Right. And so to answer your question, 100%, I think we sometimes lose track that youth sports is not even about winning. Right. And so that's why a few years ago, the whole participation trophy aspect and all that, however you feel about it, I don't whatever. Right. I don't even think we should have first and second place. Sure, winning is important. But so is losing. But we criminalize losing and glorify winning as if it's the only thing that exists. And in reality, there's so much to be taught in failure that we lose sight of. So that's where I think it's not about the kids anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And as the generations keep going up and growing, you can tell the ones who had to deal with adversity, by losing and then bouncing back and growing, compared to the ones who were just, you're going to learn my opinion, handed the participation trophy, right? And they were just like, hey, good job for even playing. And it's like, why? It's okay. His reward, their reward for playing was playing. It's supposed to be fun. So 100%. And I think we lose sight of the fact, how many times do parents ask their kids, hey, do you still want to play? Or hey, what sports do you want to play? Is there anything that you're interested in? Right. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. So, but for me, it all comes down to I'm a big self-determination theory guy, right? It's a personality motivation theory, but the whole point of it is giving people the autonomy to make decisions, and that we all want the autonomy to make those decisions. And that stems whether you're a 60-year-old man or you're a 5 or 6-year-old girl, right? It doesn't matter. You want to be able to make decisions and feel like you have some say in your own life.
I love that.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. Thanks.
And you're talking about that you work with college and pro athletes. Sure. Do you feel they're more forthcoming when they're struggling to speak with you about their struggles? Or is there still kind of a stigma around this help being viewed as weak?
Yeah. This is a question that I think about a lot, right? Because I think this goes into also the gender roles, and one of my main priorities in this life that I have, right, is to break down the idea of men's mental health, which is why I love what you guys do as a podcast, because I do see that mostly female athletes tend to want the help sometimes and kind of come out. Guys, you sometimes have to force them. Right. It's hey, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to say that you're struggling. It's okay that you're not on top of the world. And it's also okay to say that this kind of sucks. Right. Yeah. So it's one of those things. But also I do notice that the higher the level of athlete, the more willing they are to focus on the mental side of the game. Right. The more willing they understand the difference. And I was once giving a presentation to the East Granby travel basketball program right here in Connecticut. And a parent asked a question of can you explain the difference between an Olympic or a Division I basketball player and those who don't make it? And really the main difference, especially at the D1 level and things like that, is it's not physical ability, right? Usually you got the physical stuff. You're a physical freak. You're an athlete of you dominated high school likely, right? And so what separates them is the mental aspect, right? Is that ability to just grind when the grinding is needed, have grit when you need to grind your teeth, and just be able to bounce back from it. So yeah, I think pro and Olympic athletes and college athletes, they're more willing to know that, and they talk about it freely. And they're happy to be yeah. And of course, not everybody, right? It's not an overarching statement, but I do think more than the youth, right? And I think it also just comes down to if your kid says that they want to work on something, maybe find the resources for him to help. Like I said college and pro, but like a lot of high school too. For me it's like 15, 16 and above. Like those are the kids when they kind of know their next trajectory, like what they're looking for, you know. And going to the point of the 7-year-old and trying to ground his feet and stuff, that kid just wants to have some fun, right?
Exactly.
Like he's probably feeling some anxiety from something like we had talked about earlier, like the looks you might be giving when he makes a mistake that you don't even realize you're making, right? And he's just like, he looks over every time he makes a mistake, and then he goes, oh, right, and then he gets anxious about it. So that's probably where his anxiety is coming from, because if a sport is giving a 7-year-old anxiety, there's something else happening. Because sport is supposed to just be enjoyable and fun, especially at 7 years old, man.
Absolutely.
Lace up the boots and have some fun. So that's the whole point.
So with those athletes that you're talking about now, collegiate, pro,
sure,
and they're having those issues and they're open about them.
Sure.
What are some strategies that you'll typically, you know, maybe are some go-to? I know obviously it will depend on what they're struggling with, right? Everything is different. Are there certain, you know, bedrocks of your ideology that goes into your counseling that you lean on a lot when it comes to strategies you're giving to your athletes?
Yeah, man. Yeah, my consulting, depending on what I'm working with, right, as you had just mentioned, right. So a lot of the ones that I see, I should have probably mentioned this in the other question about self-talk and everything, but is that reset, right? And it happens in baseball. There's the reset moments. In golf, there's the reset moments. In soccer, there's a reset moment. Like sport has designed reset moments within. And part of my job is also identifying what those reset moments are for athletes, because sometimes they can feel like the game is just so fast and so quick and everything is going too quickly and they can't slow it all down. And before they know it, it's all over. And they're like, what the hell just happened? Right. And so like sometimes identifying those moments. And that's one reason I love working with hockey players. So like because the shifts are immediate breaks. Right, it's moments to check in. Like, hey, how was that last shift? Kind of shitty, right? I know, I saw. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, how do we reset you? And so, like, one of the things I do, whether it's a hockey player, a soccer player, baseball, golf, is have visualizations along with the self-talk, right? So, like in hockey, I would say after a bad shift, or when I'm working with a goalie after a bad goal, or even just a goal to reset yourself, squirt the water in the air, right? Look at the water and say a phrase to it. Right. Be like, well, goodbye, or I'm letting that go, or like, let's refocus, or like, it's okay, or whatever the phrase is that works for the athlete. And then as the water hits the ice, it disappears. You don't know where it went. So like, that has to be the way that you kind of think about it. Right. And like that last shift is over. Or for baseball, it's like, hey, throw some dirt in the air and say something to it. It's gone. Right. In golf, go grab your divot, put it back in the ground, stomp on it, get some anger out. Right. And then say something to it and release yourself of the tension that you've created for yourself. So like that visualization of like resetting and finding a new way to go is usually a go-to. And another one is viewing everything as stoplights. Right. So the idea of like, what are your green behaviors, like in your green mood? Like, how are you feeling good? Like you're just going through it. You're kind of feeling confident and ready to go. What's your yellow moments? What's those moments that make you go, ooh, like something's off here. Like I don't feel the right way. And what's your red moments? Like, okay, I'm screwed. Like I am deep, dark in the hole, and someone needs to pull me out of the depths of hell. Right.
Yeah.
So, and usually we never want them to get to red. It's about understanding those yellows, developing skills or routines or ways to counteract it to get back into the green, or at least get back into like the questionable, like, should I go for it kind of thing. So the stoplight aspect and the visualization or like, I guess just kind of reset cue is definitely things that I use a lot of.
And with like that stoplight, for example, if they feel themselves in a yellow or going to red, would you say, okay, maybe a meditation or maybe a breathing practice to kind of reset them, refocus them?
Yeah, that's where like go where your feet are, right?
Yeah.
If they're getting into that level, there's something so overwhelming to them that it is taking them out of wherever they're supposed to be, especially in a competition. And depending on the sport, you can't afford to get in the red. Right. Yeah. I think about like guys like Draymond Green, like when he has those initial crazy reactions, like he's gone too far. Right. Yeah. And so how do you do it? A meditation is great for like pre and post competition.
Yeah, totally.
Right. It's hard to be like, hey man, take 5 minutes and meditate on this while the game's going on. Right.
Yeah.
So it can be hard to do that, but that's very good for like the visualization before the game of like, hey, what are some things you want to focus on? And after the game being like, all right, let's avoid the woulda, shoulda, couldas. But like, what could you have done differently, or how could you have performed better? Like, or like, what did you do right? And let's keep doing it.
Yeah.
So to go off that, it definitely be a breathing exercise, right? But like diaphragmatic breath, not that, but like really, call it box breathing, call it triangle breathing, whatever you want to call it. It's the idea of like taking a breath in through your nose for 3 to 4 seconds, like a deep one with using your diaphragm and having your like stomach expand like you're blowing up a balloon, and then holding that for 3 or 4 seconds, release that for 3 or 4 seconds, and actually make the move. Like, whether it sounds ridiculous or not, there's research that shows that actually is beneficial, because it's also an auditory thing. It has your brain hear like, okay, we're trying to relax here. And then you hold that emptiness for 3 or 4 seconds. So you do that for about 2 or 3 minutes. People argue all the time, but I guarantee your body will calm down. It's just physiologically impossible for it not to, unless you're an alien or unless you're not breathing right. Which is also when people are like, "Oh, the breathing didn't work." It's like, well, you didn't do it right. I promise.
You didn't do it right. Exactly.
Yeah,
and it's used across all platforms, right? Like, we talk
100%.
to first responders on these things. They're using these breathing methods, right? Before, during, after calls. Like, it's a way that will absolutely settle yourself. So it's like, because you say breathing, people think it's so basic. Oh, that's, crock of shit. But it's like, no, it's really not. Like, this is a real thing, So
and my response is always, if it's good enough for the Navy SEALs, it's good enough for me. And that's exactly if those dudes breathe and they work for them, I'm bought in, right?
And I think the other thing too is, like, you got to use consistency, like, to really understand the effect and the impact it has on you. You've got to use it more than just once and be like, oh, it didn't work for me. Well, it's like, did you use it? How many times a week did you try it? It's not a one-time deal. Yeah.
It goes back to that point of like, how much do you practice the physical? And it's a lot. But do you practice the mental? Like, do you breathe before a big test that you're anxious for? Do you breathe before a difficult conversation with your boyfriend or girlfriend? Do you breathe before you have to go tell someone that you didn't like something they said? There's so many opportunities in our life to practice a skill that we can then transfer over into sport, or that we use in sport that we can transfer into life, that like, it's so encompassing. Like, sport is truly a microcosm of our life, in a lot of the senses. But yeah, it's about consistency and practice. You gotta, if any of your listeners take anything away, you have to practice the mental game for it to work. You can't just say, oh, I work on my mental game. And you can't just meet with someone like me once a week or once every other week and think that that's enough, right? It's just like counseling or anything in that sense. Like, the skills that I'm working with you on and teaching you, you have to apply them and be consistent with them. Otherwise, they're just a skill that you know of, and you're going to hope to God that when the gun's against your head, you're like, oh, I can handle this. And it's like, no, you can't, because you haven't practiced it. And so your body doesn't know how to recall on it. So that's really how it breaks down.
That's awesome. That's so a lot of that has to do with, too, the repetitions of stuff, like you said, but it's also the willingness to obtain and learn new information.
Sure.
And then practice that information and apply it, and then see what it does for you. Because maybe some things just aren't applicable to you, or they don't jive with you, right? Not everything is transferable from one athlete or one person to another. Some things, scientifically are proven to work, and it's just a matter of how you practice and apply them. But, some people prefer other things, and that's okay.
Right.
But that process, though, of always being willing and able to try something new, that's going to develop a level of confidence in you as well. You're going to be able to understand that you're capable of doing all these new things and applying these new things, especially if they work too. Then that's even like a cherry on top of the confidence, Sunday, right?
Correct.
Are there any other avenues that you really would lean on now to specifically talk about confidence inside of an athlete when they're struggling, right? So we'll go back to Brooks Koepka, right? He's a basket case. He's up and down all over the place, right?
Sure.
Are there certain things that you would lean on there to specifically talk and center and dial in on confidence?
Yeah, and this is where it really depends on the level of the athlete, right? And so confidence tends to be, like I had said, just it comes and goes. So, like, for an example of like a high level high school or college or pro athlete, whatever, if they have the Y word, the yippers, right? Or like they're struggling with something that they usually are good at, or they're struggling in certain situations, going back to basics, I find very helpful, right? Almost deconstructing the skill that they're struggling with down to the bare bones. and it's like, all right, let's relearn it, right? Like let's relearn it completely. And mentally, it's about the idea of allowing, and you use the word that I love, the word I love probably the most in the English dictionary is willing, right? Because like people have to be willing to do these things. They have to be willing to want to do these things. And so like we had asked earlier about like youth sports, and like when they come, I always talk to the kid, and if the kid doesn't want it, I'm not making them come. Right. Like the parent may, and I'll be like, sorry, the kid isn't looking for it. And I've heard all the things like, oh, it's just because you're not good at your job. And I'm like, sure, that's the reason. Sure. I'll take accountability when I'm the one who messes up. But if your kid doesn't want to work on something or isn't willing to, like, then I can't do anything about that. So, so the confidence has to be something they want to raise. But sometimes building the confidence just comes from the idea of just breaking it down and going back to the bare bones. Like sometimes, and even like elite high school kids, I talk to them and I'm like, why'd you start playing? Or like, what was the reason you even started? And because it wasn't for this. It wasn't to be like stressed out of your mind and driving yourself crazy. Right. And so, and it's the idea of like, oh, well, I started because like my dad used to play, and I really enjoyed shooting hoops with him in the backyard or whatever. And it's like, okay, like what's stopping you from just reliving that feeling every day? Right. And like just keeping that. And it's like, oh, the pressure and all this. And it's like, okay, all of that is made up.
Yep.
It is all created. And that's what we like as the playoffs come around for various sports. Like, again, I'm a big hockey guy. So like hockey playoffs start in like a month. Right. And it's like, dude, they're just named the playoffs. It's still a game of hockey. Like hockey is just hockey. Basketball is just basketball. Soccer is soccer. Golf is golf. Like these moments and the best players in the world, like when we talk about elite athletes, and the mental game and the physical physique, no one in this world, in my mind, personally, my opinion, whatever, Tiger Woods was the greatest of all time in any sport ever. And the reason being to do what he did and to dominate a sport, not just physically, but just mentally, to like like just dealing with the highest of high pressure situations and just like not even phasing him. It's like just the epitome of what you would hope every athlete would be. And he's talked about it before of like, but he practiced it, right? He saw himself winning every tournament that he entered. And if you ask athletes now, they're like, oh yeah, I can win this. It's like, you can, but are you going to? Right. And it's that difference of like being confident and cocky and like finding that balance for yourself. And some guys just need it. Right. Some guys just need to play with a little bit of chip on their shoulder. And you know what? You just got to roll with it sometimes. That's how they perform best. I could get into the whole theory of how that happens and all that, but I won't bore anybody with it. So
then Tiger Woods had to put his thing in every single hole.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, he's the perfect example of that because I remember reading something about him where he would like, I forget how he worded it, but it was essentially like, let them get nervous.
Yes.
Like,
I remember
you know, like, remember that, right? It was like, let them get nervous. I'm prepared. I'm confident. I know what I'm about to do. Let them get nervous and they're going to do my work for me, essentially. So like that level of confidence is like peak, but that comes from, like you said, he visualized everything and he crafted everything to be that way, to like his presence alone on the back nine on Sunday when he's wearing red, like shit was already done. You know what I mean?
So like people crap themselves when they saw Tiger and red.
That's it.
Like,
that's
they
all
knew what it meant.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's a vibe that I think, you know, confidence can take people really, really far. But I like how you there's a thin line there, cocky, confidence, chip on your shoulder, like all those things are very close to one another. But if it's utilized properly, it could be one of your best allies.
Agreed. And I think, Jack Nicklaus said it, and we didn't even talk about imagery, which is probably one of the most commonly used mental skills, but it's because it's not a very fun podcast episode. I promise. It's like I can mention it, but that's a skill that you need to practice so consistently. But it's so valuable, right? Like Jack Nicklaus once said, I never hit a shot that I didn't see first. And I think that's always a really valuable kind of thing because you talk about Tiger, you talk about any really sport, like even Tom Brady talked about the visualization that he went through, or JJ McCarthy was a big thing about meditation and how he visualized himself in certain moments, and like all that they practice that stuff. That didn't just come from it, right?
Exactly.
And my definition of cocky and confidence, I've gotten asked this in class before, and I break it down as simple as I can, right? Confidence is knowing that you're good at something and just doing it. Cocky is knowing that you're good at something and making sure everyone else also knows that you're good at it.
Yes.
And so that's how I've come to define those two different terms.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, sometimes you can be cocky and sometimes you need it. But lose the arrogant part of the cocky. That's my big thing. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, man, this has been a fun conversation, man. Honestly, we appreciate your nuggets of gold, of course, really helping the youth, helping the athletes that you're working with, also the pros as well. Where can everybody follow you and your practice?
It's a great question, man. So my website is deepbreathcounseling.com. And then on Instagram, it's DBC_sports psychology. And then on Facebook, it's just Deep Breath Counseling. And then anyone can email me with any questions they have at contact@deepbreathcounseling.com, or just go on our website and we have contact forms all over the place for you to reach out to us. Me or one of my team members will happily answer any questions that we can. People sometimes have questions about, like, how does this get started? What are your fees like, and all that kind of stuff. But whatever, I'll answer anything. I'm pretty transparent. I want to make this a service that people can actually use, because I think it has so many benefits tenfold. So, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be on here, guys. And I look forward to any future opportunities with you. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man.
This has been great.
Sure.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, of course, guys. Cheers.
Later.